Hello, I'm Noel. This is Antonia from Boxtail Soup, and we are in the studio today, but not for long, because very shortly we're going to head off to do Casting the Runes at the Horton in Epsom. We are close to the end of this tour.
Yes.
We've got a few performances left this week, and then we've got a little gap, which we'll get to in a moment, and then we've got performances at the new Wimbledon Theatre. And that kind of ends this autumn tour of Casting the Runes and Alice. So we thought we would just briefly talk about although we've talked about the places that we visited, we thought we'd just talk about the challenges of doing a touring show like this in so many different spaces.
I think we'll probably be focusing mostly on Casting the Runes when we talk about that, won't we? Because Alice, we've been doing Alice for years, not in the same iteration that it is now. We've got new puppets and things now, but when we first made that show, it was deliberately designed to go into all sorts of spaces, including non-theatre spaces. So actually, in a funny sort of way, that is never much of a problem. Even though we've changed it slightly since then, it still has the same principles. So it's sort of easy-ish, isn't it, to go into anywhere.
But
Whereas,
even then, with the scope of venues that you're visiting, if you take somewhere like the studio at the Everyman, for example, which is a very tight space, you've got a lot of width in there, but you haven't got very much space before you reach the front row of the audience, and it's quite a small audience. So you want to be able to kind of lay that out in such a way as you're still going to be able to fit everything in before you are treading on the audience's feet, but also to make it feel good in that space. And what I mean really is that if you then go to somewhere like the South Holland Centre in Spalding, where we were the other week, which has got over 300 seats, you've then got a much wider stage, much deeper stage, and you want the show to feel like it's at home in both of those spaces. You don't want it to look dwarfed by the bigger space, but equally you don't want it to look like it's too much when you're in a smaller venue. So yeah, there's even when doing a show that is kind of as flexible as that, because it is essentially just the puppets on the stands at the back rather than the amount of set that we've got for Casting the Runes. Even then, there's this consideration for how you're going to set it up and making sure that it looks good in each space that you go to. But Casting the Runes has had a few interesting challenges on this tour.
they've all been quite different challenges. I mean, we started off with the smaller spaces, didn't we? So we started off with the Everyman, which, as you mentioned, is wide and not very deep. And then the Swallow, which is a very small theatre. And so when it was squashed, it was about. It's weird actually, because you'd sort of think if you're doing it in a smaller, as in square footage, that you would find that you get places quicker, but actually it takes you longer. So because you're having to make sure that you don't step on each other, step on the set. The Swallow had a slight height restriction as well because of the beams that come across. Yeah. So you have to be careful when we're lifting things like the lamps and stuff like that, that we don't hit the roof with them. It's funny. It's equally when it's very, very big. Actually, though, to be fair, I have found the largest stages, the easiest ones, because we can confine our show, our set, into whatever area we want within that large stage. And what's nice with Runes is if you push it a bit forward on that stage and you have space at the back, it gives it this quite ghostly feel, because there's this sort of corridor of we're trying to get a bit of backlight in there. And so I found the large spaces easy, relatively speaking.
But then, I think that comes with experience, because we're looking at it and going, well, we will set it just slightly further forward so that we can have a little bit of space at the back. We know that works for the show. And I think the fact that we're aware of that now comes with experience.
As in experience of the show or experience of touring?
Both. Yeah, both, I think. And I also think that the other thing that you have to learn if you're visiting different venues like that is that even when you're in that bigger space, and so you've got more freedom, more room to move around, you've just got to be listening. You've got to be aware all the time. You've got to be really kind of conscious of what's going on around you and where things are in the space. And you can't get fixed into you can't be precious about it, and you can't get fixed into thinking, well, but I'm used to that being 2 paces away, or it takes me this many steps. You have to be flexible. You have to be ready to go, well, in here the angle is going to be slightly different. It's going to take me slightly longer to walk over there. And so, much like you do with the performance as a whole, you have to be really conscious of your fellow performer as well, how long it's taking them to get somewhere, whether you need to take your time ever so slightly more with a line to give someone more chance to move around the space.
We also had the sloping stage, which was interesting.
Well, yeah, I was just about to say, I mean, that's before you start to get to other environmental considerations.
That was the biggest challenge, because obviously the Rune set, if you've seen the show or seen any of the build of it, it features a large door, and the door stays shut because it isn't tipped forward. So if the stage is like this, the door obviously wants to stay open. And so that was, we mentioned that in the vlog at the time, we had to wedge it and all that sort of thing. But it also meant, not just did you have to practically fix that in the setup, but it then meant that during the show, we both had to be very aware of it and make sure that when it did, because it still, even after wedging it, it wanted to fall forward, open a little. Mm-hmm. So you had to be very careful when you came through it, that you shut it a little more gently than you might normally, and with a bit more deliberate purpose of shutting it.
Yep.
And equally, if either of us spotted that it was open slightly, we'd think, oh, I know, I cross this at this point, I can push it shut. So, you know, they just add extra dimensions of difficulty. At the Pleasance in London, the Revolve, because the stage, again, we mentioned that, the stage is a Revolve, which actually just simply meant that it was a bit wobbly. So not that it was actually physically really wobbly, but it did move slightly when you walked along it. So you were just aware that the ground under your feet was not as solid as it normally is, which that was quite weird, I found.
Yeah, you just have to be conscious of it, don't you? That I don't know, it just changes the way you move ever so slightly, and you have to be aware that if you're stomping around, you've got to be careful when you put things down, especially if you're putting them down on the gap.
Yeah.
Which goes between the Revolve and the solid part of the stage itself.
And that was definitely a light-footed venue. You had to tread lightly, for sure. And the other challenge with some of the spaces like that one as well is that the audience aren't end-on. So they're not just in front of you, they also come slightly round to the sides. And so you're very aware. That always becomes slightly problematic with the puppets, because there's always going to be someone who's on the very far point of that curve that's going to at some point get not the best view. So I have to be very conscious of making sure that I'm sharing, so that if someone is in that seat, they're not going to get that the whole time. They might get a couple of bits of it, and equally with the other. So actually blocking does sometimes slightly change, doesn't it?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, totally. Again, it's something that you almost do unconsciously now, but we'll often make a note of it to each other before the show, and we'll just be saying, oh yeah, we need to be aware that there's audience all the way around here, or they're coming much further around, so we might need to kind of play it to the left and right and move this scene
and
around.
You can tell what the other one is doing, can't you? Because you can tell that the other, where normally, I don't know, one of you might enter and go straight down stage centre. In a space like that, you might have come way further up stage, and you'd be like, oh, I know why he's there. It's because we need to make sure that these people can see. But that definitely comes with working. That's where it's really, really important, and probably beneficial that we work with puppets, because it's part of the way you do it, that you have to listen to each other really, really well, is what I was going to say. That you have to be so kind of in tune with what the other one is doing that you're not going to either get thrown by them moving in a different way, or worse, counteract what they've done and do something daft. Do you know what I mean? Because you've not worked it out.
Yeah, you've got to be working together. You've got to be listening and watching and responding to what the other performer is doing, or performers, depending on how many people you're talking about.
Another interesting thing actually with the puppets with different spaces is when the stage, depending on where the audience are in relation to the
elevation,
stage. Yeah, so sometimes the stage is flat and the audience are raked, but sometimes the stage is high and the audience are down there, or sometimes the stage is high, the audience are there, but then the audience are also on a balcony there. And if you're watching the puppets, at some point you want to feel like you're in their eye line. And as a human actor, you naturally, when you naturally share
of course,
with everyone.
You address to where you can...
Not that you're necessarily looking directly at people, because that would be a very specific style of performance, but that you are pointing your head, as it were, in certain ways so that everybody gets a fair amount of your face and your eyes. So it's the same with the puppets. Knowing that if there's a balcony, that sometimes you're going to want to look up a little bit more, or if they're really far down, that actually you have to spend... There have been a couple of venues
we've been to on this tour where the stage has been quite high up, so you really have to consciously be aware of where you're facing with the puppet. And often in that sort of venue, we'll have to go, I'll go down to the audience and you'll be saying, well, does this seem right? Does it look like it's looking at you now? And then you try and almost sort of record that.
Yes, exactly. The
in
position
in your muscle
hand.
memory of where is the right spot for that audience.
And that doesn't mean that you spend the whole time with your hand tipped down. Of course not, because obviously the puppets are relating to other the other performer on the stage as well. But nonetheless, again, you just want them to feel like they're not always. Most importantly, that they're not looking up underneath the chin.
And then, of course, there's huge variations in things like the lighting in venues. And so it's another little thing that you become conscious of, which is a kind of natural skill of a performer with any experience, I would say, is just finding the light and making sure that you're in a useful place. Depends very much on the venue and the range of lighting that they have, but in some spaces you'll find that it might be that there's a particular part of the stage that is better lit than others, or just because of the way the lights are rigged, it's better if you don't go too far in this direction or too far in this direction. So you have to kind of be conscious of that while you're performing as well. And you can, you develop an instinct for it because you can feel when you're dropping out of the light. So you get better and better at finding the right place to stand, or knowing like, I shouldn't really go too much further here. But it's another layer that you have to be aware of in each different space that you're going to. So there's a lot to think about. And all of this has to go on in the background while you're performing the show in an authentic and doing the best performance that you possibly can.
I think it helps to keep it fresh, though, in that sense. I think the fact that it is different every time and there are obstacles usually to overcome means that you're not just kind of thinking, oh yeah, I know this really well.
Yeah, you certainly can't rest on your laurels, can you? And you have to be.
Not that I'm saying that
aware.
you would if you were in the same venue, but it would be easier to, because a lot of once you've done a show multiple times, most of the show becomes like as if you're a driver, you drive actually relatively speaking without thinking about it, if you see what I mean. Doing a show is similar. A show that you know very well is similar to that. You'll often find that you are still saying your lines whilst moving something, but you are actually thinking, I mustn't step too far that way because I'll fall off the stage, or I mustn't put this down too hard because I can see there's a lump in the floor there that'll tip that over, or whatever it might be. Anyway. Yeah,
it's an odd sort of magical state to be in, actually, I find. I'm often amazed by how much kind of logical thought you can be having in the background while you're still trying to give a genuine emotional performance and listening to what the other performer is saying and acting in that moment. There's some other section of your brain in the back of your mind that's making a calculation about whether you can fit this puppet through this gap and whether you can get around that space. It is quite strange, but very enjoyable.
And then the other thing we wanted to talk about, I think that's probably enough about that, really, isn't it?
Yes, absolutely.
So. Yeah. The other thing we want to talk about is that we've been doing these vlogs now for a long time. We started them in COVID because of COVID, really, and we have been doing them weekly since then. Is that right?
We have done one every week
since we started in 2020, which has been lovely. However, we're sort of aware of the fact that while we're touring, for example, we don't necessarily have much that's that interesting to tell you weekly, as in. Also, it becomes quite difficult for us to actually find the time to film something. So we often have to just snatch little videos here and there and then, put it all together. So we thought, instead of doing what we have been doing, that we're going to move to something like potentially a once a month roundup, where we will still do the kind of journal entry type vlog that we're doing now, but it'll be of what we've been doing in that month rather than on a week by week, which I think will probably mean that they're a little bit more interesting, but also that it just sort of takes the pressure off us a little bit.
Yeah, and we've been thinking hard about not only what we're going to do next and what work we're going to create next, but also the kind of future for the company as a whole, and how we can take it further, and how we can kind of reach more people and share the work with more people. So it will also give us an opportunity to kind of focus on different kinds of content and different sorts of things like that.
So we've noticed that the tutorials on here people seem to like those. So it means that we can in between times we will also try and put out some vlogs that are a little bit more focused like that. So hopefully some more tutorials. And we know people really love the audio dramas, but we're not sure whether we have time to do those. They do take a lot of time.
It's a big investment. Yeah.
It is a big investment, but nonetheless we are considering all things. But just sort of to let you know, really, that there might not be one weekly from now on, but they will be still regular. So don't forget about us. Keep checking back. There will be something to watch.
And we greatly appreciate the support of people who have watched them all the time and who keep dropping messages and all that sort of thing. It means a lot to know that people are sort of interested and kind of encouraging you along.
Yes, we're not going away. We're just going to be a little bit more concise. Maybe. Anyway, so if you are enjoying the vlogs though, still do please give us a thumbs up, leave us a comment, subscribe to the channel. Welcome to any new subscribers. And we will see you again next time.